for Sidney Oswald. We've sent too many in Washington who have been too careless with the rule book. They practically have ignored the rule book, which is the Constitution. If that's how we got into this trouble, let's only send people over there that do believe in the Constitution and will obey the Constitution. Right after 9/11, within a week or two, the bill came to the floor that had been around, and it was called the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act, of course, passed. And one member of Congress told me, he says, "How can I vote against it? It sounds so good." And I said, "You know, there's some bad stuff in this." I said, why don't you read it and find out what's in it? And of course, there wasn't really time to read it. They gave it to us for an hour or two. And he said, "No," he says, "under the circumstances, I can't go home and try to explain it to the people back home why I voted against the Patriot Act under these dire circumstances." I said, "Well, that's your job. You're supposed to go home and explain it to people." TSA is not making us safer, and it's certainly making us less secure, and it's making us very submissive. So I have one little beef about it, that if we as a people can look at the pictures of being x-rays and groped, and elderly women being strip searched, and little kids being groped, I said, if we put up with that, we're in deep trouble. But right now, what I'm sensing is there's a lot of people who are sick and tired of it, and they'd like to change it. And we've had the climactic end to a system where we were systematically consuming our wealth. We did this by overspending, promising everybody anything they wanted. I mean, and we became the promoters of entitlements for everything from cradle to grave. That people that people could have free education, free medical care, and free everything, free housing, and free food stamps, the whole works. Now, it sounds good, and it's wonderful if that could work, but the government doesn't have anything. They have to steal it from somebody in order to give it to somebody. Now, immediately when we embarked on this notion that an entitlement is a right, which is a very dangerous notion, the results weren't quite yet in because we were so wealthy. But we became a nation that was more concerned about just sort of spreading the wealth around, and the government having power, and the special interests got control. And generally we forgot about what the principles of liberty were all about. Where does production come from? It comes from your basic right to your life, the right to your liberty, the right to work, and it should be the right to keep the fruits of your labor.
Yeah!
Understood that, and understood the proper role of government, not to be taking care of us from cradle to grave and not running, trying to police the world, guess what? We still wouldn't need an income tax. It wouldn't be necessary. It wasn't necessary up until 1913. Of course, that period of time in 1913, a lot changed. We became much more involved in international spreading of our military. Of course, we had the 16th Amendment to the income tax, preparing the way for big government. And also, we had another little event that occurred in 1913, which we should repeal as quickly as possible, and that was the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Act, as far as I'm concerned, is an unconstitutional act because the Constitution still says that only gold and silver can be legal tender. You can't print paper money, and there's no explicit authority to have a central bank. And that's the the constitutional argument against it. The economic argument against the Federal Reserve and central banking is they create the crises. They create the bubbles, and the bubbles then are always ended with recessions and depressions and the bursting of the bubble. And look, just recently, you know, in recent history, we've had a NASDAQ bubble, and that collapsed. But then we said, well, we'll correct it with a housing bubble, because we believe that everybody should have a house, no matter what they qualify for. So well motivated, I'm sure a lot of people thought that was a great idea, except it doesn't work. You know, who made the money? The people in the derivatives market, the people who were receiving the credit, the builders and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So they did quite well until they got in over their head and went into bankruptcy. So the market says if you go into bankruptcy or you're bankrupt, you should go bankrupt.
Yeah.
Because we have developed this system where the special interest control things, and even though we have this natural consequence of when you destroy a currency, you literally destroy the middle class. And right now, the middle class is shrinking, it is getting poorer, and because it's a special interest government, that the special interests, the powerful special interests on Wall Street and the bankers had been benefiting all this time. Guess when the crisis came, and they said, there's a crisis coming, and we have these banks and corporations, they're too big to fail. Guess what? They got the bailout.
Yep.
Compounding the problem. The transfer of the wealth from the middle class to a special interest. And this is what happened, but the debt, which should have been liquidated, wasn't liquidated, which is what is necessary. You need to get the debt behind us. So what happened? The people ended up with the debt. We own the debt. Trillions of dollars that the Fed got involved in. They were churning $15 trillion worth of credit. That makes the Congress minuscule when it comes to the dollars that are involved. And Congress, they don't even have this desire. It's a little bit better over the years, but they have a responsibility. If we don't get rid of the Fed immediately, we at least ought to know every single thing they do and everybody who lives in.
Right.
The bailouts have continued, and the middle class continues to shrink. And of course, the middle class individuals and the poor, they lost their jobs and they lost their houses. So those who argue that there's the role for government to make sure that we bail out everybody, make sure people have the free stuff if they can't provide it for themselves, it's a failed philosophy. If you look at history and you have humanitarian instincts, which I think all of us have, and I think even those who do harm with bad economic policy have this instinct, they really do believe they're going to help. But if you look at history, you'll find out the freer nations are the most prosperous nations. And this means that the freer and the more prosperous, the better the distribution. And we were the freest and the most prosperous, and we had the largest middle class, and yet now we're suffering the consequences. This is why we are at a turning point. And this is why we have to make a decision. Do we want to follow the advice of the founders and the Constitution and say that the purpose of the Constitution is not to restrain you in any way, it's just to restrain the government?
Yeah, right.
People are recognizing government is not the solution, paper money is not the solution to sound money, foreign intervention is not the solution to peace and prosperity, and it's a large number of people, it's not a couple. I've been talking about this and trying to spread a message even back in the 70s, and there were few people interested, but today there's a large number. And I think what has happened is, of course, the end stages of the system that we've had for nearly 100 years is becoming evidence. The government, no matter how well-intended they might be, those who want to run our lives, the money's gone, we are bankrupt, and the end of that is we're at that end right now. So what we need to do is to understand that there is a solution to that. And the message now is there aren't a few. There was a remnant in society. There's always a remnant in society, no matter how bad as the system gets. There's always a remnant who remembers the better things and the proper role. I think of Solzhenitsyn. He was born when the revolution started in Russia and the Soviet Union. And he was raised in that authoritarian, totalitarian state. And by the time we got to know something about Solzhenitsyn, he was well educated. He was educated in the classic. He was a religious person. He spoke fluent English in spite of living under tyranny that he had to live under. So there's always that group out there, and we never know where they are and what's happening, but they have been suppressed for so long because there's been no energy and no need and no consensus. But there's something else going on. Is this message of liberty is being very well endorsed by the young people. And that is what the young people, because we do quite well with the young people, those of 18 to 30. But if you happen to be over 30, that's okay.
Woo! Yeah!